The late Texas sun dipped low behind the distant hills as Ember Leigh Dalton stepped out of her old truck, boots landing in the dust with a soft crunch. The air smelled of dirt, sweat, and rusted iron, the scent of old secrets buried deep. Ahead stood the auction pen at Tillman Ranch, where broken horses were sold cheap and fast. Ember pulled her braid over her shoulder and narrowed her eyes toward the paddock. She wasn't here on a whim. She was following a name whispered in a letter left behind by a mother who died with too many things unsaid. There he stood, separated from the others, ribs visible under a scarred red coat, and eyes that held no fight, only silence. The other horses pawed the ground or tugged at reins. But this one didn't move. He didn't look afraid. He looked like he'd already given up. Ember stepped closer to the fence, her fingers tightening around the rail as if anchoring herself to that sorrowful stare. Something about him pulled her in, like they shared the same shadow. That one? Huck Tillman scoffed behind her. Ain't worth the rope he's tied with. Mean, busted up, and full of trouble. Should have put him down months ago. His voice was as dry and cracked as the land he owned. The cowboys around him chuckled low, already turning away like they knew how this story ended. Ember didn't flinch. What's his name? Name? Folks called him Thunder's Hollow once. Now they just say, Ghost. Huck spit into the dirt. He belonged to Jett Holloway. Before he vanished. The mention of that name twisted something deep in Ember's chest. She'd seen it before, scribbled in the margins of her mother's journal. Jett Holloway. Thunder. Do not forget. Ember swallowed hard. How much? You serious? Huck raised a brow. Tell you what, sweetheart. Give me 200 and he's yours. But don't come crying when he kicks a hole through your trailer. Without a word, Ember pulled a wad of crumpled bills from her back pocket. Money saved from working double shifts and selling off everything that didn't fit in a glove box. She handed it to Huck and stepped forward. The horse didn't retreat as she reached for the lead rope. His eyes met hers, steady and hollow. Like he recognized her, or maybe remembered someone else. As Ember led him away from the auction pen, dust rising in their wake, none of the cowboys said a word. But somewhere across the yard, Loretta Cain watched from the shadows of her porch, one hand shaking against her teacup. The past wasn't buried deep enough. The ride back to Ember's rented trailer was long and quiet, with only the hum of the tires on the gravel road and the occasional whimper of the wind slipping through the cracked window. Thunder stood silent in the trailer behind her, unmoving like a statue carved from grief. Every few minutes, Ember glanced in the mirror, half expecting him to vanish like the name tied to him. Jett Holloway. That name had haunted her mother's final pages. And now, it was following her. As night fell over the Texas flatlands, Ember pulled into the small, overgrown lot just outside of Juniper Ridge. It wasn't much, a rusted-out trailer, a makeshift corral, and an old feed shed that leaned like it had secrets of its own. But it was hers, for now. She parked, stepped out, and walked to the trailer, her hand hovering over the latch. Thunder didn't move. Not even his ears twitched. When she opened the gate and whispered his name, he stepped down slow, as if unsure the ground would hold him. Inside the corral, under the soft hum of a single floodlight, Ember brushed his coat gently, careful around the raised scars that ran along his left flank. Cashin Reeve, the county vet, had warned her about these old auction horses. Most were damaged beyond repair, some more mentally than physically. But Ember didn't believe in lost causes. She saw something in Thunder's silence, something that echoed inside her. He didn't lash out. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, like he was waiting for something, or someone. Later that night, she sat at the small table inside her trailer, flipping through her mother's worn leather journal. Pages filled with half-sentences, old dates, and names that meant nothing, until now. Thunder's Hollow. Jett. Loretta. Don't trust Huck. Ember traced her finger under each word. She didn't know what happened between her mother and these people, but the weight of it was real. Her mom had left this place and its people behind and never came back. Suddenly, a knock rattled the trailer door. Ember jumped. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she opened it to find a woman standing in the shadows, wrapped in a long shawl, her silver hair glowing faintly under the porch light. It was Loretta Cain. Her eyes, tired and sharp, scanned Ember's face like she was reading a memory. "I saw you take the horse," Loretta said, voice soft as smoke. "You don't know what you've brought home, child." And then she turned and walked away, leaving Ember in the doorway, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something worse, recognition. Morning broke slow and pale, the kind of dawn that carried more silence than promise. Ember stood by the corral, coffee in hand, watching Thunder graze near the edge of the fence. He moved with caution, each step measured like he expected the earth to betray him. She understood the feeling. Her thoughts drifted back to Loretta Cain's visit the night before. Those few words still echoed louder than the morning birds. "You don't know what you've brought home." The journal lay open on the porch table behind her. Ember had spent half the night rereading the same 2 pages. One passage now burned into her memory. He was born at Holloway Ranch. Jett loved that horse more than life itself. When Thunder vanished, so did Jett. And no one ever told me the truth. Her mother's handwriting had grown shaky by that point, like she was afraid of writing what she already knew. Ember had a gut feeling Loretta did know the truth, or at least a part of it. But what was she so afraid of? Later that morning, Ember drove into town. The feed store was quiet, a few ranch hands inside sipping bad coffee and arguing about fence posts. Behind the counter stood Maribel Sloane, thin and soft-spoken, with eyes that didn't miss much. Ember placed a bag of grain on the counter and casually asked, "You ever hear of Jett Holloway?" Maribel paused, fingers tightening on the register keys. "Not in a long while," she said carefully. "Why?" "I bought a horse yesterday. They said he used to belong to Jett. Name's Thunder." Ember watched Maribel's face shift, a subtle flash of concern followed by something deeper, something close to fear. Maribel didn't answer right away. She just looked past Ember, like she was watching a storm roll in through the glass. "You should talk to Cashin," she said finally. "The vet. He knew Jett better than most. And he was there the day everything changed." Back at the trailer, Ember poured fresh water into the trough, but Thunder didn't drink. He just stood there, head tilted, staring at the hills beyond the fence like he was remembering something, or someone. His eyes weren't blank anymore. They were searching. That night, as the wind picked up and thunder rolled in the distance, Ember stood at her window and whispered, "What happened to you?" But the horse didn't move. And neither did the truth. Not yet. Somewhere far off, a figure stood alone by a grave with no name, and a horse's bridle laid gently on the stone. The veterinary clinic on the edge of town looked more like a converted barn than a medical building. Weathered wood, peeling paint, and a wind chime made of horseshoes swayed in the breeze as Ember stepped out of her truck. The bell above the door rang soft and hollow when she entered. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and cedar shavings. A calico cat slept under the counter, and in the back, she heard someone humming an old tune, low, almost mournful. Cashin Reeve emerged from the exam room wiping his hands on a stained towel. Tall, with dark eyes and a beard that looked like it had been forgotten rather than styled, he moved with quiet precision. Ember had only met him once years ago, at a fair where her mother had taken her to see the horses. She remembered his voice, not loud, but solid, like the ground under tired boots. "You're Ember Dalton," he said, not as a question, but like a memory being dusted off. "You bought the Holloway horse." She nodded. "Thunder." Cashin leaned against the doorframe. That horse has more ghosts than most men I know." He didn't smile. "Why'd you buy him?" Ember hesitated. She could have lied, but something in Cashin's presence made that impossible. "My mother knew Jett. She wrote about him, and Thunder. Something happened between them, and nobody ever said what." The silence that followed was sharp. Cashin turned his gaze to the window. "Jett was my friend. Not many folks around here remember the truth, or want to. Thunder wasn't just his horse. They were bonded in a way I've never seen before or since." He walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a manila folder. Inside was a single, faded photo. It showed Jett Holloway, younger, smiling, one hand gripping Thunder's bridle. Both looked strong, wild, and utterly inseparable. Cashin handed it to her gently. "That was the last day I saw him alive." "What happened?" Ember asked, heart thudding. "He rode out after a fight with Huck Tillman," Cashin said quietly. "Something about land, ownership, bloodlines." Next day, Thunder was found wandering near the canyon. Bleeding. "No Jett." Cashin's voice dropped lower. "And Huck said he knew nothing." Ember stared at the photo, a knot tightening in her chest. There was something in Jett's eyes, something familiar. She had seen it in Thunder. And maybe, just maybe, in herself. Outside, the wind picked up again. Dust swirled through the parking lot like it was chasing something forgotten. Cashin looked at Ember one last time and said, "You keep that horse close. He remembers things the rest of us buried." Back at the trailer, Ember couldn't stop staring at the photograph Cashin had given her. Jett Holloway had that rare look in his eyes, wild freedom laced with quiet sadness. Thunder, standing beside him in the photo, looked nothing like the broken animal in Ember's corral now. He had once been fire and motion, not the silent ghost she'd led away from the auction. Somewhere between that photo and now, something had died, and Ember was starting to believe it wasn't just Jett. That evening, Ember waited until the sun dropped low before she approached Thunder again. He stood near the far post of the corral, head down, ears twitching only when the wind shifted. With a slow hand, she brushed down his side, fingertips grazing the scarred flesh just above his flank. She paused. The scar was deeper than it had looked before, thick, uneven, with ridges that didn't match the kind of wound a fall would cause. Not from rocks. Not from a tumble. It looked like a blade. She grabbed her phone and snapped a photo, sending it directly to Cashin with a short message. "This wasn't an accident, was it?" Less than 2 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Cashin replied with a single word. "No." The message hit harder than she expected. Ember sank to the edge of the corral, dirt cold beneath her. Her mother's journal, Jett's disappearance, the horse no one wanted, the way Huck practically gave him away, it was starting to form a shape. And it was ugly. The idea that someone had hurt Thunder, maybe to cover something up, made her stomach churn. Her mother's warning echoed louder now, "Don't trust Huck." As the stars blinked into the sky one by one, a truck engine rumbled in the distance. Ember stood and stepped toward the road, her eyes narrowing. A dusty pickup slowed by her gate, not stopping, just watching. Behind the wheel, she caught a glimpse of Wyatt Granger, Huck's right-hand man. His eyes met hers through the windshield. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just drove on into the dark. Inside the trailer, Ember locked the door for the first time since moving in. Thunder paced outside, nostrils flaring, restless under the moonlight. He felt it too, the shift in the air, the turning of old wheels. And from the hills beyond Juniper Ridge, a figure watched through binoculars, lowering them slowly as he muttered, "She's digging too deep." The next morning brought a fog Ember wasn't used to, thick, damp, and heavy like a warning hanging in the air. Even Thunder seemed unsettled, pacing slowly along the corral, his breath rising in clouds. Ember fed him in silence, the photo of the scar still fresh in her mind. Every second she spent near him confirmed it. Someone had tried to erase Jett Holloway from the world, starting with his horse. With Cashin's message burned into her thoughts, Ember took the back road out of town, following a route her mother had scribbled years ago on the inside flap of her journal. Opal. Cabin past Dry Creek. She sees what others refuse. It sounded like nonsense at first, but Ember had learned to stop doubting her mother's instincts. If someone remembered what really happened, it would be the woman who lived far enough from everyone else to never be silenced. The cabin appeared like a shadow in the fog, nestled between two dying oaks. Ember parked and approached slowly. The screen door creaked open before she knocked. Opal Marin stood there, thin, upright, with long white hair falling down her back and a glassy stare that missed nothing. She was blind, yes, but Ember immediately felt like she was the one being seen. "I wondered how long it'd take you," Opal said, her voice soft and dry like parchment. "You've got your mother's fire, and her questions." Ember stepped inside. The cabin smelled of sage, old books, and rain-soaked wood. Opal moved slowly, guiding herself with a cane, but her words were sharp. "You bought the Holloway horse. That animal remembers things none of us dare speak." Ember sat, her fingers tightening around the photo of Jett. "What happened to him?" Opal didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled a tin box from the mantel, opened it, and handed Ember a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, written in Jett's own hand, dated 2 days before his disappearance. The words trembled on the page. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Huck wants the land. He wants everything. Thunder's the last proof of what he did to get it." Ember's chest tightened. The pieces were coming together, slowly, dangerously. She looked at Opal. "Why didn't you come forward?" The old woman's lips pressed into a tight line. "Because the last time someone tried to speak, they ended up 6 feet down with no headstone. And I made a promise to your mother." Outside, the fog began to lift. But the truth? It was just beginning to thicken. Ember drove back from Opal's cabin in a silence thick enough to choke on. Jett's letter sat folded on the passenger seat, heavy with the kind of truth that changes everything. The sun was setting behind her, casting long shadows across the road. In the distance, she could already see the outline of Tillman Ranch, land her mother once called stolen. Land that Jett had tried to protect. Now it made sense why Huck practically gave Thunder away. The horse was the last thread connecting him to a crime buried under years of silence. At the trailer, Thunder stood by the fence, still and alert. When Ember walked up, he didn't look at her. He looked past her, toward the hills. He felt it again. The shift. The rising storm. Ember reached out and gently touched his mane. "They tried to erase you," she whispered. "But you're still here. And so am I." She knew she couldn't wait anymore. With the letter as her only protection, Ember headed into town. She found Cashin locking up the clinic for the night. His face darkened when he saw the paper in her hand. He read the letter slowly, jaw tightening with every line. "He gave this to Opal?" he asked. Ember nodded. Cashin looked away, as if trying to decide whether to speak or stay silent like the rest of them. "I always suspected it," he finally said. "But Huck, he's got friends. Sheriff, judges, ranch hands that owe him. Speaking out would have been suicide. For Jett, it was." Ember's voice cracked. "My mom knew. She tried to warn someone." "She did," Cashin replied. "Me." He looked her in the eyes. "But I was a coward. I didn't listen when it counted." Later that night, Ember walked out to the corral with the letter in hand. Thunder approached her slowly, his eyes softer now, like he could feel her grief. She held out the paper, letting him sniff it. "You remember him, don't you?" she asked. Thunder pressed his nose gently against her arm. That's when she heard it, the slow crunch of tires on gravel. A truck. Ember turned toward the road, heart thudding. Headlights flickered through the trees, then disappeared. Whoever it was hadn't come to talk. They'd come to watch, to warn. Inside her trailer, she locked the door again. This time, she kept the lights off. Because now, she wasn't just chasing ghosts. She was threatening the living. The next morning, Ember woke to the sound of hoofbeats. Not Thunder's, heavier, faster, coming from the ridge behind the trailer. She threw on her boots and rushed outside, the morning sun barely above the horizon. A rider was already disappearing into the trees. She caught a glimpse of the dark jacket, the tilt of the worn hat. Wyatt Granger. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was checking the perimeter, like a man preparing for something he couldn't undo. Ember's hands trembled as she led Thunder from the corral. The horse was agitated too, ears flicking, muscles tight. He didn't want to stay still, and she no longer wanted to keep him in the open. She saddled him carefully, heart racing with each buckle, and rode toward the far side of Tillman Ranch. If Huck was hiding something, it was going to be in the part of the land no one talked about, the section her mother once marked with a red X and the word, Hollow. She found it at midday, a narrow gulch behind a broken fence, thick with mesquite and silence. The air changed as she rode deeper, cooler and still. Thunder moved slower here, his steps cautious. Then he stopped, ears pricked, eyes locked on something ahead. Ember slid off the saddle and stepped forward. There, half buried beneath stone and dust, was a rusted horseshoe nailed to a rotting wooden post. And next to it, a collapsed wooden shelter, scorched on one side, like it had once burned. Ember crouched, brushing away the dirt with her hands. That's when she found the leather, thick, cracked, and stamped with the initials J.H. Her breath caught. She pulled harder. A piece of bridle. Then a fragment of shirt. And beneath that, bone. Her hands froze. She had found him. Behind her, a branch snapped. She spun around, heart thudding in her chest. Wyatt stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle lowered but not holstered. His face was pale, lips tight. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said quietly. "You knew," Ember whispered. "You were there." Wyatt looked down, guilt pouring off him like sweat. It wasn't supposed to go that far. It was just a scare, just to get him off the land. "Huck didn't know I brought the rope." Ember stepped in front of Thunder, shielding the horse from whatever came next. "You buried him, and then you buried the truth." Wyatt raised his eyes to hers. "And now you've dug it all up." Wyatt didn't move. His hands hung at his sides, the rifle now forgotten. The guilt in his eyes aged him 10 years in seconds. Ember could barely breathe. The remnants of Jett's life and death lay in the dirt behind her, and the man responsible stood in front of her like a ghost who never quite left the scene of the crime. Thunder snorted behind her, pawing at the ground, sensing the tension like a thread stretched too tight. "I told Huck it was just to scare him off," Wyatt said, voice shaking. But Jett didn't back down. He said the land was rightfully his. That Thunder's bloodline proved it. He had papers. Real ones. He looked at the ground. Huck snapped. Started shouting. Told me to make him disappear. But I swear, I didn't mean for him to die. He hit his head when I dragged him down the slope. Ember stepped closer. And instead of calling someone, you buried him in the dirt like trash? Wyatt's jaw clenched. No one was going to believe me. Not in this town. Huck owns everything. The land, the sheriff, the silence. And me. He looked up at her, broken. He told me if I ever said a word, I'd end up beside Jett. Thunder moved again, slowly approaching Wyatt. The man looked at the horse like he was seeing a ghost, not just of Jett, but of every choice he had made since that day. "He remembers me," Wyatt said, almost in a whisper. "I see it in his eyes. That horse saw everything." Ember held out Jett's letter. "This changes everything. Cashin's with me. So is Opal. People are ready to talk. You don't have to carry this alone anymore, Wyatt. But if you stay silent, then you're still burying him." Wyatt looked at her, at the letter, at the horse who refused to turn away, and something inside him cracked. He fell to his knees in the dust, the same ground he once dug to hide his sins. "I'll talk," he whispered. "I'll tell it all. But Huck won't go down easy." Ember nodded, her voice low and steady. "Neither will I." As they walked back through the clearing, Ember leading Thunder and Wyatt walking behind like a man heading to his own trial, the wind picked up and carried with it the sound of something long buried clawing its way to the surface. Justice wasn't coming. It had to be brought. The courtroom was small, packed with old wood and older grudges. Huck Tillman sat at the defendant's table, jaw clenched, eyes burning into the back of Wyatt Granger's head as he took the stand. Ember sat just behind them, hands gripping the edge of the bench, Jett's letter folded neatly in her lap. Thunder wasn't allowed inside, but he was just outside the courthouse, tied gently under a sycamore tree, calm and waiting, like he always had been. Wyatt spoke slowly, voice heavy with the weight of truth. He told the room what happened that night. How Huck wanted Jett gone, how he brought the rope, how it all spun out of control. Cashin testified next, confirming the scar on Thunder wasn't from a fall, but a blade. Opal Marin, led in by a deputy, spoke with quiet force about promises made and truths kept too long. And when Ember finally handed over the letter, the judge's face shifted. Something real had finally cracked through the silence. Huck's defense crumbled in hours. His lawyers tried to shift blame, discredit the witnesses, call it all hearsay. But it was no use. Too many years of buried truths had finally been unearthed, and they smelled of guilt. The judge's gavel hit like thunder itself. Guilty. On all counts. Outside, the sun was high and blinding. Ember stepped down the courthouse stairs to find Thunder waiting, ears perked, head high, like he knew. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the warmth of the animal who had carried not just the weight of Jett's loss, but the truth of what happened. He hadn't forgotten. And because of him, neither would the world. In the weeks that followed, Ember worked the land Jett once fought to protect. With Wyatt's confession, the courts returned the disputed acres to the Holloway estate, and Ember, as next of kin through her mother, now owned it. She didn't sell it. She rebuilt it. Barn by barn. Fence by fence. Thunder, finally free, ran along those hills again, strong and alive beneath the same sky Jett once rode under. One morning, Ember visited the old clearing where Jett had been buried. Now a wooden marker stood there, carved with care, Jett Holloway, the man they tried to forget. She tied a piece of his old bridle to the post, then stepped back. Thunder stood beside her, ears forward, still. And in the silence she swore. She heard hoofbeats, not of the horse beside her, but of the one who'd never truly left.